Hey everyone, welcome to Mystifying Miracles. Today I'm going over a story of a man named Carl. And Carl woke up one morning with no vision. And it's quite the story, and his healing is just beautiful. So I'm going to talk about his story in just a moment, so stay tuned. One morning, Sandra Elder's husband, Carl, he got up and he was quite alarmed. He walked out of the bathroom and he told his wife, "I can't see. I have no vision in my right eye." He and Sandra prayed together before starting their day that morning, and a few days later, he finally was able to get in with the ophthalmologist to try to figure out what was going on. Apparently, a blood vessel had ruptured, and due to that, the damage was very bad. In fact, the doctor told Carl that unfortunately it can't be fixed, and that he was going to be blind for the rest of his life in that eye. Carl obviously was very disappointed, as anyone would be. He was hoping for something to try out that might help, whether it be surgery, corrective lenses, anything. But according to the doctor, that just wasn't an option. Despite this bad diagnosis, Sandra and Carl continued every day to pray about this. And in addition, it wasn't just prayer. They'd also make time for praise. They would praise God for the good things He was doing in their lives. For instance, Carl still had vision in his left eye. That was something to praise for. And that's something they did every day. Shortly after this diagnosis, the two of them traveled to California, where there was a No Limits conference. The first night of this conference, they had a speaker by the name of Randy Keys, and he spoke an anointed message on the power of God's healing. And as he's speaking this message, Brother Keys is walking back and forth. He steps off the stage and he starts walking down the aisle. And he stops at a particular end of an aisle. And that just happened to be right where Carl and his wife Sandra were sitting. Randy ends up placing a hand on Carl's chest. And he begins to proclaim and preach healing over Carl's body. Carl says when he did this and when this happened, it felt like an electrical current kind of just went right up that whole pew. Even his wife felt it somewhat. Well, after Randy's done with his message, or nearing the end anyway, Carl covers his good eye because he wants to test out his vision. So he starts looking at the screen ahead, looking at the colors and the words, and then he leans over to his wife Sandra and he says, "Honey, God just healed me." After they returned home after the conference was over, Carl made an appointment with the ophthalmologist once more because he wanted to get documentation of this miraculous event he just experienced. And as the nurse is looking in his eyes and inspecting his vision, Carl witnesses to her and tells her what happened and how he was healed. The nurse herself happened to be a believer, and she ends up praising God right there with Carl and his wife. Just excited to hear this healing story. Well, the doctor finally enters the room, and Carl begins to tell him the same thing he told the nurse, everything that had happened and how he was healed. But Carl says the doctor wasn't having it. His face was quite tight looking, and Carl described it as even looking somewhat dark. His facial expressions that day just screamed unbelief. As he spoke to the nurse to order some more tests, he kind of said it under his breath, like with pursed lips. You know, he seemed very angry. Well, test after test was run that the doctor had ordered, and every test showed that Carl had 20/20 vision in that right eye. It was quite unfortunate that the doctor never did acknowledge that a miracle had taken place. When all the signs were there, he just wouldn't do it. In fact, he was so perturbed, I guess, about it, he refused to ever see Carl again. He just took him off the books, off the patient list, and told him he couldn't be seen. Very weird, but yeah, he was angry. Nonetheless, though, Carl had 20/20 vision in that eye for the rest of his life, till the day he passed away. After I read this story, it had a big impact on me. It's sad that the doctor just couldn't believe and he was angry. I do hope that at some point down the line that changed and that doctor, his heart changed and he saw what was truth. And then I began to think about a time in my own life that was kind of similar. Before I was diagnosed with MS, I woke up one morning and I couldn't see, and it was my right eye. Everything was blurry, and I had double vision, which was bizarre. If any of you guys have ever had double vision, you know what I mean. You can't see a thing because even though you have a good eye, I don't even know how to put it. It's messed up because this eye is seeing double, like double of everything plus the blurry. And I was just like, oh gosh, something's really wrong. I thought I'd had a stroke. Well, come to find out, nope, it was multiple sclerosis. No big deal. So yeah, that was just a very trying time in my life. It was like that for a few months. I want to say 3 months at least, or close to it. And I even had to, I remember looking like a pirate because I had to put a patch over the bad eye so that I could see out of the good eye. And I would just, oh, guys, it takes me back to that sad point in my life because I would cry every day. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, I was 30 years old. So, losing my vision and not knowing what's going on. I couldn't walk because my left leg was all messed up. I was a mess. And it really makes you think. I remember thinking it back then and having conversations with family and close friends. I said, you do not know how thankful you truly are for something so simple as vision until you lose it. Same thing with other things like hearing, movement, things that we don't think about on the day-to-day because we've always had them, and when you don't, man, you realize how grateful to God you are that you did have it and that you hope it returns if you do lose it. Obviously, my vision did return. I was blessed, so thankful, still so thankful today for that to God. Because again, it disrupted everything. My work, I couldn't work. The days I could work, I had to have somebody drive me and pick me up because I couldn't drive. So I have a lot of compassion for those that have experienced that or are experiencing that currently. But despite that terrible time in my life, I think God allowed it for a specific reason because it did strengthen me. It did. It humbled me. It made me more compassionate towards others that struggle with illness and disease and just disabilities. And I think most important, my faith just began to go deeper. My faith and my belief in God, because I had nothing else. When you go through something like that, you're grasping. You can either grasp at straws and worldly things, or you can turn to Jesus. And that's what I did. I had to. I'm not saying, I made mistakes too back then and probably grasped at other things I shouldn't have. But the main point of this story is that my faith did deepen and it grew, and it makes you thankful. It makes you thankful, guys. And just remember, if you're going through something like that, praise God. Thank God for what you do have and watch things change. Watch things change. God will change you from the inside out. It'll happen. And it's quite amazing. So anyway, that's my little spiel. This story reminded me of my struggles when I went through that. And I just thought I'd share it with you guys. So anybody out there struggling, going through similar things, know you're not alone and that God's always with you. Never think that he isn't. I do hope you guys enjoyed this little story, and I hope it blessed you. I hope you have an incredible week, and I am going to see you guys for the next one.